Good morning. So let's begin with a new topic today. This is on boiling and condensation, or if I can say, heat transfer because of phase change. And we will consider these two processes of boiling and condensation to be forms of convection, as we will study today, because they involve fluid motion. You will see that these two processes actually induce fluid motion, and that is the reason they are sometimes, we study them as part of convection analysis. The major important part about boiling and condensation is because these are phase change processes, so a large amount of heat can actually be transferred at a constant temperature. So that becomes a key feature that drives our, or that's the motivating factor for us to study this. So large amount of heat can be transferred at a constant temperature. So we'll in today's lecture I will focus on boiling, and in the next lecture on Monday we'll discuss about condensation. So when we talk about boiling heat transfer, there is a key aspect to it, and a certain thing that we should know, that we are talking of boiling and we are saying that this is heat transfer that occurs because of a phase change of a liquid to a vapor. But this is quite different from evaporation. Boiling and evaporation can sometimes be used synonymously, but they are not the same. The difference is that evaporation does not involve the formation of bubbles or bubble motion. Boiling involves the formation of, okay, so if I can write, boiling involves formation of bubbles and their motion, but evaporation does not. Okay, evaporation is just a phase change process, and predominantly, to be even more clear, evaporation actually happens at the interface of a liquid and a vapor. But boiling, when we talk about boiling, we talk about boiling occurring at the interface of a solid and a liquid. So you can imagine, when I say that boiling occurs at solid liquid interface, the easiest example, and by the way, it happens at the interface of a solid and or a solid and liquid only when the solid temperature is more than the saturation temperature of the liquid. So that is a condition required to be able to attain boiling. So the simplest example that I was going to point out for this case could be boiling of water in a pan. So let's say we have a pan or a pool of liquid water, and I insert a heating rod into this pool. So there's a heater, and say the heater temperature, the surface temperature of the heater is maybe 110 degrees Celsius. The water is actually in surrounded by 1 atmosphere, or is in 1 atmosphere pressure, and so I know that T saturation at this condition would be 100 degrees Celsius. And so boiling in this case by this heating element will be characterized by the formation of vapor bubbles, which would maybe rise from the surface and may be present on both sides, or rather the entire circumference of the surface. So that is what we are dealing with now. We're dealing with this phase change process, and very similar to the way we've been defining other convection heat transfers, we can define the boiling heat transfer also in terms of Newton's law of cooling. Here we will say that the flux is of course proportional to delta T, but we will say it's the heat transfer coefficient times the temperature of the solid surface minus the temperature or the saturation temperature of the liquid. And this difference Ts minus Tsat is going to be frequently written from now on as delta Te, where delta Te is denotes the excess temperature. So it is basically the temperature over and above the saturation condition at a given pressure. Okay. Now of boiling heat transfer basically involves, or the way it's different from convection heat transfer, is that when we were dealing with convection, we only had one phase, maybe air or some other liquid, let's say water, and we had very nicely. I mean, the correlations were quite neatly defined in terms of properties of that fluid. But when you have phase change, you have not just one, let's say water in the liquid phase, but you also have water in the vapor phase, and then there is also interaction between vapor and liquid. Okay, there is interaction in the vapor and liquid, especially on the surface of or the interface of the solid and vapor. So this interaction is characterized, of course, in terms of surface tension. And because we have phase change, we will also have a latent heat coming into the analysis. So when we build or when we do analysis of boiling heat transfer, or in fact when we go to condensation as well, when we do any phase heat transfer, it is not just the property of the starting phase that is important, but the property of the other phase which is created, which is also important. So our analysis in this segment, so our analysis will include properties of the liquid phase, which I'm going to denote by a subscript L, very similar to probably the way you must have done it in thermodynamics, and properties of the vapor phase, which we are going to denote by a subscript V, as well as the latent heat of, in the case of boiling, the latent heat of vaporization. So HFG is the latent heat of vaporization, and the surface tension, which is at the liquid vapor interface. And this we will denote by the symbol sigma. So these will be the key parameters that we will be dealing with for all such analysis. Now, quite interestingly, or in fact, you should notice the simplest example is if you look at the TS diagram of maybe water, you may remember that as we increase the pressure, and again when we are in the two-phase region, we are actually inside the dome. Remember the saturation dome. So if as we increase the pressure, the latent heat of vaporization actually decreases, and it actually becomes zero when you get to the critical point. And similarly, the interfacial tension sigma also decreases with increasing temperature, or in that case also increasing pressure. So we need to remember that HFG will decrease, and so would sigma with increase in temperature. So as temperature would increase in our problem, so temperature would basically increase because we're increasing the pressure in the system. Let's say if the liquid is pressurized, then these two properties will decrease. The next part is, or the next important thing to remember as we go along, is that it is usually in, especially in thermodynamics, we consider that the vapor and the liquid phase are actually at the same temperature, but that is not the case, simply from this is heat transfer is a non-equilibrium process. Equilibrium requires that the two phases should be at the same temperature, but not in heat transfer. So heat transfer to take place, there has to be some temperature difference between the vapor and the liquid. And as I will talk to you about today, I will show you today, the process of heat transfer inherently involves the vapor being at a higher temperature in boiling. So there would be a temperature difference. Okay, so there would be a delta T between the vapor and the liquid phase, and they will not be equal. And this delta T becomes the driving force for heat transfer. And in addition to delta T, there would also be a pressure difference between the two phases. And this pressure difference is actually balanced by the interfacial or the surface tension. So you may all have heard about Laplace law, which sort of correlates the pressure difference between in the inside of a vapor and the outside liquid. So that is in terms of the radius of curvature and in terms of interfacial tension. So you can imagine that this is similar to that, that the pressure difference will come in, and that pressure difference is going to be counteracted by the interfacial tension between the two phases. Okay, so now boiling is not such a simple process as I've shown here. In the easiest example of boiling by a immersion rod, let's say in a pool of water, and boiling is classified based on or boiling has further classification. It is not just one typical way. So when we classify boiling, we classify first of all based on the simplest possible method. And the simplest is that either boiling will take place in the form of what we call as pool boiling, or it could be in the form of flow boiling. Pool boiling is essentially boiling in the absence of any fluid motion. So this is boiling in the absence of, I should not say any fluid flow motion, but any fluid flow. We are not driving the flow by an external means. So boiling in the absence of fluid flow. There would be fluid motion, as you will see, but this is in the absence of any fluid flow. Flow boiling is when you have sort of forced convection boiling. So you are driving the flow over maybe a heated surface, and the liquid is changing phase. So this is an example of forced convection boiling. So as I said, it's in the pool boiling is in the absence of fluid flow. That means it's a stationary. The fluid is stationary that to begin with, and heat transfer from the surface, the heated surface to the liquid. It takes place due to natural convection. Okay, so natural convection currents are set up, and because the heated, when the liquid in contact with the heated surface has a change in density, its density decreases, so it rises up because of buoyancy, and then the heavier fluid takes its place. So that is how boiling, especially when we talk about pool boiling, is initiated. So example of this is, that's what I've done in the sketch there, which is boiling of water in a pan. So what we all do to make chai every morning, but that's in the simplest example of boiling of pool boiling that you would see around. Forced boiling or flow boiling would be, as I said, it is forced convection. So you can actually have fluid being forced over a heated surface, or or a heated duct, so such as a pipe. So if you force the liquid through a pipe, let's say, and you're heating the pipe, then and the liquid can change its phase, then that's an example of flow boiling. These two categories are further classified into the state of the liquid at the beginning of the heat transfer process. So these are classified into either subcooled boiling or saturated boiling. What I mean by these two is that both pool boiling and flow boiling can have subcooled boiling and saturated boiling, but these are two different categories or two different classifications in themselves. And what is the difference between these two? So let's take the same thing. Let's say we have a pool of water in both scenarios, okay, and we are supplying heat to the pan, say from the bottom surface. So this is heat coming into the pan. Now the difference is that in both cases, water, which is in the liquid state, is, let's say, exposed to atmosphere at 1 atm, except the water in the first case is, let's say, at 80 degrees Celsius. The bulk temperature is 80 degrees Celsius, and in the second case the bulk temperature is 100 degrees Celsius. So what we expect is, and again, let's say that the surface at a given instant, let's say, is 110 degrees Celsius in both cases. So since the surface is hotter as compared to the saturation temperature, we will have bubble formation in both scenarios. So we will have maybe formation of some bubbles in both cases. Except the first case, you will see that the bubbles will actually will depart, but will quickly collapse in the liquid, and so by collapsing they will transfer their energy to the liquid and raising its temperature. In the second case, the bubbles may actually even collapse, but they will rise further, and they can always coalesce. So there are two different scenarios in that sense. The first case is, as I said, is the case of subcooled boiling, because the temperature of liquid water, the bulk temperature, is less than the saturation temperature. So this, in this case, T of the bulk is less than T sat. In the second case, the bulk temperature is equal to the saturation temperature. So this is saturated boiling. So what we'll do in today's class is to look at pool boiling quite majorly. This is, I would, let me warn you right now. This is going to be a very descriptive lecture, because we will talk about an experiment that was performed, and this is a phenomena that we observe probably on a daily basis. So I will try and go into the details of what boiling is and what are the different regimes of boiling, with some very little quantitative information. But the ideas will actually flow from the classification that I've at least put down so far. So let's begin with pool boiling, and we look at pool boiling regimes. And we derive a lot of our information of pool boiling, even though this has been a hot area of research for a long time now, and there are lots of, if you open literature, you'll find thousands and maybe millions of papers on this aspect.
Sir, in subcooled boiling, water is at 80 degrees centigrade.
The bulk temperature, the water temperature.
Yes, sir. Then, uh, how this bubble forms, it is not understood.
Because the liquid at the bottom is in contact with the hotter surface, so its temperature is higher. Locally locally the liquid is at a higher temperature. It may have reached a saturation temperature. You understand that?
No, sir.
See, bulk, when I say it is, think of it, the bulk temperature as a temperature which is far away from the surface. It's not that the whole liquid is at 80 degrees Celsius.
Yeah, yes, sir.
Okay, so locally, because the surface is hot, You cannot. So this liquid locally here near the surface would have been at a higher, would have reached a higher temperature, and that is the reason you start seeing these bubble formation. But as
Yes,
these
sir. Got
bubbles rise, yeah, as these bubbles rise, they see a liquid at a cooler temperature, so they collapse.
Yes, sir.
That is
Got
what
it.
I was saying. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you. So anyway, so I was saying that bulk of, or much of what we understand about pool boiling is derived from an experiment that was performed by Nukiyama in 1934, and of course it has been refined over the years by many researchers who've gone into this area, including my own advisor who did considerable work in this area. Uh, so the experiment was quite simple. So what Nukiyama did was he had a pool of water, right? A tank, let's say a saucepan of which is filled of water, and he inserted an electrically heated wire into the water. And so he passed a current through this wire, which was a metallic wire, either nichrome or platinum. And what he observed was that as the temperature, he kept supplying higher and higher, current into the wire, the boiling mode kept changing. Okay. And so based on this information, he classified the pool boiling uh, process into four regimes. So Nukiyama defined four different regimes of pool boiling, and these are: it starts out as a natural convection boiling, which is, and as I will show you very shortly now, natural convection boiling would mean that the there's no bubble formation yet. The liquid starts heating up. Okay, it starts taking heat from the heater surface, and so because of natural convection it rises and the cooler liquid comes in its place. So the bulk so the liquid essentially is exchanging energy with its, it's heating itself up. The second regime is called as nucleate boiling, in which nucleate boiling starts at the, as the word says, nucleate. It comes from nucleation. So nucleation is essentially the formation of bubbles, the first bubbles that form into the in the boiling in the pan. The third one is what is called as transition boiling, which I will tell you about, is an unstable zone. And finally we get into film boiling. So four zones that Nukiyama observed in his experiments, and what he observed in terms of data is what I want to show you now. Okay, so let me just pull out the schematic that I just created based on his experiment. So this is a rough schematic. Just I just drawn something with, just to illustrate what Nukiyama was observing. This is not very quantitative, especially on the y-axis. But let me explain to you what I'm showing here. So what I'm showing is the different regimes of of pool boiling of water at 1 atmosphere pressure. What I have on the y-axis is the heat flux, and on the x-axis we have the excess temperature. Both axes are actually on log scale. In fact, that is how it is reported. My axes are just this is a rough schematic, so I'm not sure said that it's log scale. But if you look at the x-axis, you can see that it's on a log scale because the temperatures are actually, the gap is decreasing, right? So it has to be a log scale. Okay, so there are four regimes, as I said. There is a natural convection regime, there is a nucleate boiling regime, a transition boiling, and a film boiling regime. And I've labeled some points on this curve which are very special points. So A, B, P, C, D, and E, and we will discuss these now in more detail. Now, there's one more thing that I should mention, that Nukiyama, as I said, he had immersed, or he had inserted a wire into a pool of water. So in his experiment, actually, it was the heat flux that I've shown here on the y-axis that was actually the independent variable, because he could control the current that he was passing through the wire. Okay, so I square R is what was the heating rate, and since the area was a constant, so flux is basically I square R by the area, which as we also asked in the first quiz, if you recall. So I square R, or rather the flux was something that he could control, and so the flux became the independent variable in the problem, and the temperature, the surface temperature, because delta TE is delta TE, which is TS minus Tsat, right? At 1 atmosphere, Tsat is fixed. So delta, or rather Ts, became an independent variable. So he could observe the surface temperature of the wire. So this mode, which in which Nukiyama did his experiment, right? I will just put it here. It is also called as a power controlled mode. Because what he was controlling was actually the power in the wire and not the temperature, the surface temperature of the wire. Okay. So what are the key factors in this curve? So let's just discuss those now. So first thing is, as I said, natural convection boiling is just heating of water. So we are starting somewhere here, which is zero, which is, of course, I cannot draw zero on a log scale, but you can imagine that we are almost, slightly above saturation temperature. We start from there, and so water starts getting heated up until you get to a point which is point A. So up to about 5 degrees Celsius in terms of excess temperature, or delta T is up to 5 degrees Celsius, we get natural convection mode of heat transfer from the surface to the water, and we get, of course, fluid motion, which is brought in, because as the water heats up, it rises, and the cooler water comes down in its place, and so that space is taken up by the cold water or the cooler water. So much of the analysis that we have developed in free convection, which is in terms of heat transfer, is actually applicable in this zone up to A. So from the starting to up to point A, which is, I also have written a number, or an abbreviation here, ONB, which means onset of nucleate boiling. Okay, ONB is onset of nucleate boiling. The heat transfer correlation that we have developed in free boiling, in or free convection, can be applied. Now things get interesting from point A. So point A is the point where you start seeing nucleation, first sign of a bubble that appears in the on the surface of the pan. Now this is, as the bubbles appear. Now the bubbles don't just appear all over. They appear at preferential sites, at specific sites. Okay, and when they appear at these sites, they also disappear very quickly. So what this out happens is that as the bubbles appear, they grow in size, and then they depart from the surface. So as they're rising up, they quickly dissipate in this zone, which is, let me say, zone A to B that I've drawn here. Okay, the whole nucleate boiling regime is also split here in two zones. If you see clearly, or if you see carefully, there is a zone A to B, and then there is a zone B to C. Okay, so in A to B, let me write this. In A to B, which is characterized by delta TE between 10 and 5 degrees Celsius, as I said, the liquid, or the bubbles are formed, they rise, but they collapse. And because there is this inherent now motion being brought in, and also phase change taking place, the heat transfer coefficient increases as delta TE is increasing. So as the heat, so as the bubbles start forming and they start rising, you get both delta TE and H increasing. As a result, the heat flux also increases, which is what is shown here. Although I'm deconvoluting the problem. Let me, pardon me for doing this, because I said we are looking at the power control mode. But for now, let's assume that we have this curve, and that we are somehow controlling the surface temperature. Let's just assume this for now. Okay. So maybe we're increasing Ts, so delta T increases. As delta T increases, H is also increasing because of phase change, and so flux is also increasing between A and B. Now, between B and C in the nucleate boiling regime, which is characterized by delta TE between 30 degrees and 10 degrees, we get bubble formation at a much higher rate now. In this case, from B to C, bubble formation happens at a much higher rate, and bubbles don't collapse. In fact, what you would see are columns of bubbles formed from the base of the pan all the way to the surface. So the bubbles actually get released on the surface. So you may have observed when you boil water, you get this on the surface. You get this one location where bubbles will be forming, and those bubbles, that location will extend all the way to the surface where the bubbles start, releasing in the air. So that is a zone B to C. Okay. So B to C is a zone in which I said H again. In this case, H is also increasing, or rather, I should not say H is increasing throughout, but in this zone, uh, there is a point P which is quite crucial, which I've drawn here. So point P is a point of inflection. So this point P is a point of inflection, and this is a point at which, or beyond, up to which, the heat transfer coefficient was increasing, or other point P is the point where the heat transfer coefficient is a maximum. Beyond point P, the heat transfer coefficient starts decreasing. So what happens is that in this case, the heat transfer coefficient can only go up to a certain magnitude. At point P, it reaches a maximum, although delta T is still increasing. So at point or beyond point P, delta T is still increasing, but H decreases. But H decreases in such a way that the flux, which is a product of H into delta TE, still keeps increasing. So the H decreases marginally as compared to the rise in delta TE. Okay, and the flux still is increasing. So point P is a point where the heat transfer coefficient. So at point P, H is a maximum. So what is taking place in this case? Why do we say that that H is decreasing, or what is going to take place beyond point P? Now, what is going on is that as the vapor, remember this. Now, there is, as I said, there are going to be more sites at which vapor will form at the on the bottom, on the heater surface. So formation of this, so the vapor clouds the surface so much that liquid is not able to effectively reach the bottom surface. So the vapor it's reaching to a point where the vapor is not allowing the liquid. There is still space where liquid is there, but the vapor is not allowing the liquid to effectively come and occupy space on the pan, or the heated surface, because of which H starts decreasing. Okay, there is the phase change is now being impeded somehow. But this process doesn't continue forever. We reach a point C, which is shown in this curve. We reach this point C at which the flux becomes a maximum and it can no longer rise. So this point C, which marks the end of nucleate boiling and the onset of, or rather I should say the beginning of the transition boiling, okay, is point C marks the highest or the maximum heat flux that can be provided to the liquid. And this heat flux, if you want to calculate in terms of just numbers, this heat flux, by the way, it happens to be somewhere more than about 1 megawatt per meter square. So the heat transfer coefficient corresponding to this heat flux will be about, if you look at the figure again, the temperature is about 30 degrees Celsius, or delta T is about 30 degrees Celsius at point C. So this happens to be about 3 10 to power 4 watt per meter square Kelvin. So the heat transfer coefficient ends up being very high in this nucleate boiling zone. In fact, it is many orders of magnitude higher than any heat transfer coefficient that you would have encountered so far while solving problems in forced or free convection is anyway very small. But even in forced convection, you will never see a coefficient as high as this number. So because the heat transfer coefficients are so high in this regime, and these heat transfer coefficients can be achieved with a very small delta T E, right? So delta T is only 30 degrees Celsius. So you're only 30 degrees higher than saturation temperature. That means only if you only increase the surface temperature a little higher than saturation temperature, the heat transfer coefficient can be very high, because of which this becomes a very effective mode of heating a liquid surface. So this is a preferred mode. Nucleate boiling happens to be a preferred mode of boiling. So if we are trying to operate any system in which boiling takes place, preferably this should be the zone in which we should try and operate. Now beyond nucleate boiling, we get into transition boiling. So transition boiling is from 30 degrees Celsius to 120 degrees Celsius. Now this is also called as transition boiling, is also called as partial film boiling, partial film boiling, or sometimes also called as unstable film boiling. So it extends when delta TE is more than 30 degrees Celsius. And again, this is for water. It doesn't mean for all liquids. Okay, and up to about 120 degrees Celsius. So this is a zone in which rapid bubble formation takes place. And because of this rapid bubble formation now, the film or the vapors effectively starts to block the surface from the liquid. So the liquid surface, or rather from the solid. So the solid surface starts getting covered with a liquid, with a vapor film, and the liquid is no longer able to go and attach itself and convert into the vapor phase. And importantly, in this zone, because the vapor is sort of hogging the surface, the solid, the heater surface, and the vapor conductivity being much less than as compared to the liquid conductivity, so the heat transfer starts decreasing. So the flux starts decreasing in this zone, and the heat transfer coefficient is also much smaller as compared to the nucleate boiling regime. So what I'm saying is, if you want to just say in some terms of the heater surface, so if this is the heater surface, what we will see is a vapor film that will start to cover the heater, and the liquid would be on the other side of this. So the vapor is not allowing the liquid to come in contact with the surface. Okay, so this is liquid, and this is the vapor, and the yellow one is the heater. Now we get to, so this continues, by the way, this continues until the entire surface is covered with the vapor. So this is not that it happens instantaneously, but it takes, as I'm showing here, it takes a long time for the vapor to be completely hogging the surface, until we reach a point D where the vapor has completely covered the surface. And at point D, we reach a point of minimum heat flux. Now, this is a point at which which is also called as the Leidenfrost point, and marks the beginning of the film boiling regime. So it starts from point D, which, as I said, is called the Leidenfrost point. So I'm sure you're aware of the Leidenfrost effect, which basically is the phenomena when you have a liquid bouncing off from a very hot surface. So the heat transfer to the liquid from the hot surface takes place through a vapor film that sort of separates the liquid from the surface, right? So the easiest way to observe that, I'm sure some of you might have seen this or might have read about it, but the easiest way is that if you have a hot surface, let's say a tawa in your kitchen, and it's really hot, you just splash a few drops of water on it, and you will see that the droplet doesn't just stay in one place, it starts to just bounce around and slowly vaporize. So that is the Leidenfrost effect. So Leidenfrost point is the point of the minimum heat flux, and primarily because, as I said, the heater surface is completely covered by the vapor film at this point, and so heat transfer to the liquid from the vapor happens to, or rather, from the liquid or to the liquid from the surface happens through the vapor, which has a very poor thermal conductivity. But beyond point D, the heat flux starts rising. So why is that? Now that is also an interesting aspect. Now beyond point D, what is going on is that the heat transfer is taking place through the film, through the vapor film, except the temperature is much higher, because of which radiation starts coming in. So now we have not just heat conduction through the vapor, but we also have radiation from the surface to the liquid through the vapor film. So radiation leads to a higher or an increase in heat flux in this zone, and so the liquid, or rather the heat flux, increases as delta TE increases. Okay, so that was the or just a description of what happens here. Now let me talk about some aspects that I have not described so far. Now, when Nukiyama was doing this experiment, and as I said, he was doing it in a power control setting, which means that he was increasing the heat flux. He went along the following path, or he observed in his experiment that the path that he could, or the data that he could get, was something like this. He could actually go along this way, along the boiling curve, okay, along the arrows. He reached the point of maximum heat flux, and then from here, he straight away went to this point on this curve. Okay, this is, or he jumped through the film boiling or the transition boiling regimes. So he didn't see these parts in his experiment. This part was gone, it was not there. And what he did was, and when he was doing this, he was originally doing this with a nichrome wire, and nichrome wire actually has a relatively lower melting point. So when he went from point C and he reached here, this wire suddenly snapped. The temperature of the wire surface became so large that the wire melted. So point E is what I've written here as the burnout of the wire. It was a burnout point for the wire. So he noticed that every time he did this experiment, the same thing happened. So what he did was he replaced his wire, nichrome wire, with platinum. And platinum has a higher melting point, in fact, the highest melting point of all metals. So what he did was he went with platinum, and then he could actually again go through this curve, and he could reach point the other side of film boiling regime, and he could go slightly higher along this until platinum also failed. So clearly he noticed that he never got this curve, and he couldn't explain then what was going on here, why there was a sudden rise in temperature from point C to point E. Why, how does the temperature rise so suddenly? What he did was he actually also repeated the experiment the other way around. He took the wire before till right before the burnout point, and then he started decreasing the power. So when he was decreasing the power, another thing happened. So when he was coming back from this side, okay, he noticed he could go along this curve up to the Leidenfrost point, and then the curve suddenly shifts to this side, and then he went down here. So then again he missed this transition boiling regime, but he could recover the film boiling part. And so what you see now is a hysteresis loop, that you go from one point to so the curve doesn't the curve doesn't follow itself when you are going in one direction or returning on the other direction. Okay, so this transition boiling regime that we are, as I'm saying, that it is an unstable mode, is is something which, that is the reason it's also unstable, is because it's difficult to replicate unless you have a constant temperature, or if unless you can maintain the surface temperature. The other part is, as I said, the burnout happens very close to the flux at which you get the critical condition, the critical heat flux condition. So sometimes point C is also, or in fact, even our book that we are following actually calls point C as the point at which you have a boiling crisis. Sorry, boiling crisis. It is called as a point of boiling crisis, or in given this terminology, because it is a point at which, or just above this heat flux, the wire or the surface may actually melt. And it is especially important because, remember, it's not just boiling of making of chai that we are interested in. This kind of a system is what is also applicable, or is commonly used in nuclear reactors. When you have a nuclear reactor powering a submarine, right, you don't want the reactor rods to melt or its components to fail. So we don't want to go any way, or when you are reaching point C or close to point C, you know that any more increase in power will actually lead to burnout, because you will jump from here straight to point E. And the reason you jump, let me also say a few words about this. The reason you jump from here to here suddenly, from C to E, is because beyond point C, the vapor blankets the surface, and the vapor is not a good conductor of of heat, because of which the heat flux which is being supplied, let's say, to the surface, can no longer reach the liquid. It rather, the surface itself starts absorbing that energy, and so its temperature rises suddenly. So the surface temperature rises suddenly, and as it rises, it sort of goes into this mode where it goes from point C to point E, almost, or point E, almost instantaneously. Okay, so we need to be worried about this boiling crisis or the burnout point, and typically point C dictates that boiling point or the burnout point, not point E, because at that point the temperature is anyway very high. We are close to complete failure. Okay, so this is the pool boiling regime, at least in qualitative terms. Okay, so what I will do now is just list down some methods by which we can analyze, or which we can do some calculations for this curve. And because there are different physical mechanisms or physical there's different physics for each and every regime, we end up applying different methods or different calculations for each and every one of them. So for the natural convection regime, which I don't even need to state this now, but let me just say this for the record. For the natural convection regime, we end up using correlations that we've developed in free convection, and we can apply them here. Okay, to calculate the rate of heat transfer taking place. For nucleate boiling, or the entire regime of nucleate boiling, the most widely used correlation is attributed to Rosenau. So we use Rosenau's correlation. And Rosenau's correlation sort of gives us the heat flux as a function of the properties of both phases. So it is mu L times HFG times G rho L minus rho V by sigma square root into Cp of the liquid. Remember, subscript L would denote liquid, into delta TE divided by CSF, which is a constant, the latent heat of vaporization, and the Prandtl number of the liquid to the power n, the whole thing cube. So in this correlation, CSF and n are constants and they depend on the fluid surface combination. So these constants are given in your book for different combinations of fluids and surface. So please check that. So I'm not going to list them here. Anyway, it's not an exhaustive list because as in more and more surfaces and fluid combinations are being tried, more and more of these parameters are being recovered every day. What did I want to say other than that? Yeah, so the fluid properties in this correlation are to be evaluated at TSAT, both liquid and vapor are required to be evaluated at TSAT, at the saturation temperature of the liquid. Also, if you notice here, this correlation sort of has an HFG here and an HFG cube here. So effectively, the flux is proportional to 1 by HFG square. And so if you have a pressurized liquid for which HFG will be smaller, the heat flux will also be smaller in this regime. So in the pool boiling regime, the heat flux will be smaller if you have a pressurized liquid. For the critical heat flux, which is point C on the boiling curve, so this is a difficult thing to uh, calculate, except there is a analytical solution that was derived by two people separately and then combined into one equation. So the equation was derived separately by Kutateladze in Russia and Zuber, and they sort of expressed the heat flux in terms of, again, properties of the vapor phase and the liquid phase. So they could write that the heat flux maximum is some constant C, Cr, which is critical condition, into the latent heat, into the density of the vapor phase, into sigma G rho L minus rho V by rho V square to the power 1 by 4. So they found that purely by stability theory, they could derive this correlation separately, both of them. So that's why both of them get credit for it. Uh, and the other part is that this number C critical was actually, they derived it to be something, but when the data was fit to, or when this correlation equation was fit to the data that was being obtained, people found that C critical or CCR is about 0.149, which gives the best fit on large horizontal flat heaters. So when you have a large uh, horizontal flat heater, then C critical is about 0.149. Now, quite remarkably, the maximum heat flux is independent of the viscosities of the two phases, which is in itself a huge thing. It's also independent of the thermal conductivity and also the specific heat. So keep this in mind that it doesn't depend on specific heat, it doesn't depend on viscosity, it doesn't depend on thermal conductivity. Okay. For the minimum heat flux, which is point D on the curve, the Leidenfrost point. Now, for the transition regime in itself, for the transition regime, which is a curve which is sloping downwards, Okay, this curve is of little practical interest, and so no adequate theory has been developed. People are not concerned with it as much, because when you are doing heat transfer process, you very rarely have this. You're actually trying to heat in a power control mode, so this doesn't become very important to be characterized. But what Zuber did separately was that he tried to calculate the point of minimum heat flux, and he basically was doing looking at the flux that characterizes a stable film being formed on the entire heater surface. So we found that for that condition, when a stable film is formed, the minimum heat flux is given as zero point zero 0.09 into rho v hfg into g rho, sorry, g sigma into rho l minus rho v by rho l plus rho v square to the power 1 by 4. So again, similar to the point of maximum heat flux, we again have similar behavior here, that there is no thermal conductivity involved, and there is also no viscosity involved. But again, this is just for academic purposes. We never really rarely do we care about the minimum heat flux in this problem, because our objective is to transfer as much heat as possible. So minimum heat flux is not something that we are concerned with. The last regime was the film boiling regime. And in the film boiling regime, remember I mentioned that beyond the Leidenfrost point, or the Leidenfrost point is a point where the complete surface is covered with vapor. So there is no contact between liquid and the solid, or the solid surface. So this behavior has a strong similarity with the laminar film condensation, which we will cover shortly. With laminar film condensation, and I will discuss a little bit of that theory there. And so, based on some assumptions that I will show you in the next section, the Nusselt number could be calculated for this using the same assumptions that we were going to make there. So the Nusselt number in this case, okay, over a surface which is maybe a cylinder or a sphere, is written in terms of the average heat transfer coefficient into d by k of the vapor, is written as c into some constant into g rho l minus rho v hfg prime d cube by kinematic viscosity of the vapor, thermal conductivity of the vapor, into Ts minus Tsat, which basically is delta Te to the power 1 by 4. So C is a constant that depends on the geometry. So it is 0.62 for horizontal cylinders, and it's about 0.67 for spheres. That's just from pure fitting the data on, or fitting the correlation on the data. And HFG prime is what is called as a modified heat of vaporization, and it comes in because heat transfer in this regime is taking place through a vapor. Heat transfer from the solid to the liquid happens through a vapor phase. So we have not just the latent heat at that saturation temperature, but we also have a correction for the heat transfer taking place through the vapor. So we have zero point 0.8 into CPV Ts minus Tsat. So the Cp into delta T becomes a correction on the latent heat. So this is applicable in the early part. This correlation is applicable in the early part of the film boiling regime. But as the temperature rises even further, then radiation becomes dominant, and so in that case, radiation mode also has to be accounted for, this analysis, something which I'm not doing in this class. I'm avoiding that part here, because the solution there are not simply, cannot be found simply. There is a transcendental equation that is formed, which is difficult to solve analytically. So I'm ignoring that, but the information is available. If somebody is interested, please go and read in the book. It's there, in some, at least some account is given. Okay, so this is the pool boiling curve, with most of the equations that can be used to analyze heat transfer at different or in different regimes of this curve. The next thing that I want to now quickly cover up is forced boiling or forced convection boiling. The second category of boiling methods. And in this case, it is different from pool boiling, as in that the conditions of boiling depend strongly on geometry. So geometry in this case would mean that either it's external flow over a surface, right? Maybe you have liquid flowing over a heated plate or a cylinder, or we could have flow in a duct or a pipe. Okay, so that both cases will have different behaviors. Now, in heat transfer terminology or lingo, flow in a duct or pipe is also called as two-phase flow. Okay, when you have forced convection boiling in a duct or pipe, that is also called as two-phase flow. Now, what is the main difference between forced convection boiling and pool boiling? So to show you that difference, let me just draw again sort of the heat flux versus excess temperature curve, but in a simple sense now. Say the pool boiling curve was something like this. Let's say this is pool boiling with its maximum heat flux at about somewhere around 1 megawatt per meter square. Now, if we compare flow boiling with this pool boiling curve, let's say we have a liquid flowing over a surface and we are trying to heat it, right? Let's say even in a pan, say you start churning the liquid, so you start you induce some motion in the liquid, maybe at a gentle rate, so the liquid is moving around. Now in this case, what you will see is, if you churn with a low velocity, the critical heat flux will actually increase. So this is at some low velocity. So the qualitatively the curve looks similar, except the critical heat flux is pushed. It increases. But if you go to even a higher velocity, the critical heat flux can actually be increased even further, and so you will see a behavior of that kind type. So presence of a flow would lead to a significant increase in CHF. That is something that has been observed, and that I think you all would also reasonably expect, because if you have a uh, velocity, if you are inducing a flow velocity, you can actually transport more energy in the flow, and so the heat flux can also increase. Now this is for, as I said, this is for external flow. Okay, I should also mention this is for external flow only. Internal flow is slightly complicated. When we have flow boiling in a duct, this is slightly more complicated, and there are different regimes in internal flow boiling. And let me again bring one more picture to show you this. So in internal flow, typically this is what you will see: different regimes again, and the different regimes sort of come like this. So say the liquid enters in a subcooled mode. Okay, maybe it was at room temperature, at 1 atmosphere pressure. It was at room temperature, so it enters maybe around 25 degrees Celsius. So the first zone here, which I've shown, is actually the zone in which the liquid heating is taking place by forced convection, and the same method that we have developed so far are applicable. But then what happens is, at some point, bubbles start forming on the inner surface of the tube. Okay, the bubbles start forming and they detach from the tube, and because the bubbles start forming, there is a certain increase in H. So the heat transfer coefficient, which is shown here on this, so the X, this axis is showing H, and this is showing the length along the duct. So the H starts increasing when you have a bubbly regime. At some point, these bubbles, as now the nucleation of bubbles starts increasing on the surface, they start coalescing, or they start agglomerating, and they form these slugs. These large slugs are formed. Now this is a zone where the heat transfer coefficient increases even further, because there is much more heat transfer, there's much more amount of liquid converting into vapor. Beyond slug flow, so this slug flow continues, the slugs start getting bigger and bigger until you reach a point where you get an annular flow. The annular flow is marked with the condition that the vapor is primarily confined in the annular region, or the core region of the, I should say, the core region of the tube, and the liquid forms a film in the annulus between the vapor and the solid. So this is a zone where the heat transfer coefficient reaches a maximum. Okay, so this is a zone where heat transfer coefficient is the highest. But what happens beyond this is that as the annular region has a film on the surface, or rather the liquid film on the surface, the liquid film now starts converting into vapor. So the annular region starts shrinking, and the vapor starts occupying more and more cross section area, until you will reach a point where the vapor will completely take over the liquid, and the liquid will completely become dry, or the surface will become dry. The surface will not have any contact with the liquid, and that is a point where the heat transfer coefficient decreases suddenly. Beyond this point, whatever liquid is remaining in this tube or in this duct will actually be in the form of a mist. It's very, very small droplets that would also eventually vaporize and convert into vapor. But this is a saturated, you can say this is a saturated condition, or the liquid has converted into saturated vapor at the mist flow condition. Mist flow finally converts into, if you keep heating it more, mist starts converting into superheated vapor, and this is a point where, the liquid that you started with is completely superheated vapor, and heat transfer can again be considered based on forced convection, or if the temperature is very high, then in terms of radiation heat transfer. Okay, so these are broadly the regimes. There is not much quantitative work to be done here, but this is for your information, that you expect these regimes when you are dealing with boiling inside a duct. Okay, anyway, so I will stop it here.